You hear the word allowance on a contractor's bid and think flexibility. What it really means is that if you don't control it, it is risk. Allowances are not fixed costs. They're placeholders that quietly shift budget exposure from the contractor to you. Most flips don't fail because of bad deals. Many fail because allowances were set so low that labor wasn't clearly included and overages got hit with contractor markups, one small decision at a time. I have seen $150,000 rehabs turn into $190,000 projects without a single mistake, just vague allowances and unchecked change orders. On this channel, I'm going to show you how real fix and flip investors use allowances the right way, how to lock in labor, cap markups, protect your margin, and make sure your budget is real, not a guess. If you want to flip houses faster, safer, and with fewer surprises, this channel is for you. Hi, everyone. My name is Betty Georgeski, and I'm a real estate investor and entrepreneur here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have spent over 15 years in the construction industry on the financial and operational side of large projects. And now I'm applying those lessons to the fix and flip world, learning, building, and growing in real time. This channel is for real estate investors, especially those on the fix and flip journey who want practical lessons, real numbers, and proven strategies to overcome the challenges, avoid costly mistakes, and reach your financial goals faster. I'll be sharing what works, what doesn't, and the mindset it takes to win in this business. If you're serious about real estate, you're in the right place. So what does it mean when a contractor gives you an allowance when it comes to choosing materials for your fix and flip? When a contractor gives you an allowance on a fix and flip in a contract, this means that they're putting a placeholder dollar amount in the contract for certain materials you haven't chosen yet. It's a budgeting assumption, not a fixed price. In plain English, let's just say that the contract shows that the kitchen cabinets have an allowance of $18,000. What does that mean? The contractor is not locking in the exact cabinet cost yet. You're free to choose the cabinets later, and the contractor has assumed that it will cost $18,000 to buy those items. So if you pick cabinets that cost $16,000, that means that you get a $2,000 credit at the end of the contract. If you pick cabinets that are $21,000, you will end up owing $3,000 more in change orders that the GC will send you later. So the labor to install the cabinets may or may not be included. So it's very important that you clearly make this clear in your contract language. So where do we usually see allowances in flips? Allowances are typically used for finishing materials, where your taste and the price of the materials will vary. So you will typically see it being given allowances for cabinets, countertops, flooring, tiles, plumbing fixtures, lighting, appliances, interior doors and hardware, and vanities. But what you should not use allowances for, you shouldn't use it for demolition, framing, electrical roughing, plumbing roughing, because these costs should be relatively the same and similar, to be more fixed, irrespective of the finishing materials that you choose to have. So why do contractors use allowances if there are inherent risks embedded within it? From the contractor side, the fact is you as an investor haven't finalized your selections yet, number one. And number two, the material pricing can vary wildly from when you sign the contract to when the products are actually being delivered and installed in your project. So it lets the general contractors give you a proposal, so you can move move along with executing the contract without having to guess the exact materials or the pricing of the materials that you pick. And from your perspective as a real estate investor, allowances are a great way to give you flexibility to upgrade or downgrade the finishes. And it allows me to also have faster contract execution without waiting to fine-tune for the exact prices. It also gives us investors the ability to shop for deals and to use preferred vendors that we might like to use down the line. So why are there big risks associated with allowances? The common problems that we see where allowances have really blew budgets, quietly, it appears up in these 5 instances typically. Number one is when a general contractor will set the allowances so unrealistically low so to make the bid look much cheaper up front, but then later on will come back and send you a change orders for added costs down the line. Number 2 is when these bids for this allowance budget do not clearly state whether it includes the cost of the labor that is necessary in order to install these materials. Number 3, allowances become a problem when it is also not clear from the contract whether this amount includes the sales tax, the delivery cost, and the cost for disposing the wasted materials from the wasted material. Number 4 way that I've seen it happen is that when the overages are subject to contractor markup applied on top of those overages. So you budget, for example, $150,000, worth of cost. It can turn up to be $190,000 very easily this way. So every selection could potentially become a positive or an increased change order amount. So what are we investors to do in order to make sure that we protect ourselves? What is important is that we must clarify, and this is non-negotiable, that before you sign up for anything with a general contractor, you need to get clear answers to these 6 things in writing. Number 1 that you need to have very clear is that, does the allowance include or exclude labor, right? Number 2, does it include sales tax, delivery, and the cost for disposal? Number 3, what is the contractor's markup on over allowance costs? Number 4, who purchases the material? Is it you, the investor, or the contractor? Number 5, what quality level is assumed by this allowance dollar amount? Is this, let's say, $18,000 cabinet? Are you assuming that that's builder grade level of finish, or is it mid grade, or is it premium? You need to clearly specify what is it, that quality of the materials that is assumed by that dollar amount. Number 6, so how are the credits handled if I come in and I actually purchase materials that's under the allowance money? If the contract doesn't clearly spell this out, you as the investor is exposed and is subject to risk. The rule of thumb that what I would recommend for investors who are doing fix and flip, there's about 5 key rules that I like to make sure that I follow. Number 1, you need to lock in the rough and structural work as a fixed price. So that way you have more certainty in how much this specific scope of work is going to cost. Number 2, only use allowances for finishes, things such as we discussed earlier, that that your taste might change later down the line, or the prices is varied. Number 3, you should base the allowances on what actually sells in that neighborhood. For example, take a look at the comps that are in the neighborhood, and if you see that, let's say, countertops, most of the neighborhoods is using, let's say, granite countertop, then you have to do your research, how much does granites cost around in that area, and use that as the basis for coming up with an allowance amount. Don't be having trying to build an allowance amount for more expensive finishes such as marble finishes and quartz finishes, when in fact your neighborhood is, homes around that area only use the lower end materials. So try to have the allowances based on what is actually selling in that neighborhood. That way you have a more realistic dollar amount that is attached to that allowance to make you be able to predict how much your cost is actually going to end up as. Number 4, build into your allowance amount slightly over for what it might ordinarily cost. It's better to over allow than to under allow. So if your material that you're based on your research comes up at 18,000, maybe you build in there 10 to 15% higher in the cost, so that way to allow for potential changes in the price later down the line, or you might want to have a little bit upgrade in the finishes if you locate a finishing material that costs a little slightly more. So factoring in that little buffer of 10 to 15%, will help you prevent you from help you to predict the cost that much more correctly, and that way that you are not caught off guard by the added cost. And then finally, number 5, you should be able to, it's very important to track your allowances in a separate budget tab. So you can put in what is your plan dollar amounts that you had set up with. Let's say you had a budget of allowance of 18,000 for cabinets. Then as the cost and your selections are made clearer, and if you choose your actual cabinet materials, you should be able to track the cost on the actual. It's very important to track the variances, whether you have gone above, over those budgets, or coming as under. Because going over the budget, it's critical for you to be able to reel that in, because you might need to either find where can you have money to be able to fund those additional costs, or you might need to cut down on some other expenses in order to fund the amount that you have gone over on your allowance budget. So what I would recommend for investors out there to treat allowances as not like real savings, right? But it's much more safer to treat them as kind of like contingent liabilities. It is a potential liability because, you might not know if the prices of the materials might go up. So look at it in a more conservative view that it's not real savings, but it's liabilities, potential liabilities down the line. So the bottom line is that allowances, it's a flexible tool. It is not a guaranteed cost, and this is a common place where contractors would try to shift that risk onto you. If you use allowances correctly, allowance will help you to move fast, but if you use it carelessly, they can really quietly destroy your flip margin. I would like to use the 2 common problems that that I typically have seen and witnessed where allowances have really caused investors to get into some really deep trouble by not being clearly accounting for these things in the contract language. The 2 examples is that number 1 is that when labor is excluded from the allowance amount, but this is not clearly stated in the contract language. So what you think is, like, it means, it's like when they say cabinet allowance of $18,000, you're assuming as an investor that the cabinet's allowance amount includes the cost for the materials plus the installation. It's covered in an amount. You assume that the $18,000 is a total line item. But what it actually means, in common reality, is that the $18,000 only covers the material only. Labor will be billed by the GC separately later, or the labor will be buried in a change order when you finally make your final selection. The real flip examples, like they might show up the allowance in the contract. For example, cabinets are $18,000. What happens later? GC will send you a bill which bills you for the cabinet installation labor, which is another $5,500. Also bill you for the trims and the fillers, like $1,200, and also bill you for modifications due to changes in the layout of $1,800. So your actual cost, it's $26,500 total. You just blew $8,500 and didn't technically go over the allowance on paper. So what you end up being exposed to is that now labor shows up as a non-allowance change order, and you can't even argue to say that it's an over allowance because labor was never included in the first place. And then what will also some investors end up finding out is that your lender will only fund based on the original contract. So you end up like experiencing a cash squeeze where you have to go and try to look around for the added funding in order to cover that additional allowance that you did not originally budgeted for in your original rehab budget. So how do you protect yourself? I think it's very important for us investors when we come to the table to demand that we have contract language like the allowance includes the materials, delivery, taxes, and the installation labor unless otherwise stated. If labor is excluded, it must be listed as a fixed line item and not a future to be decided number. Okay? The number two common problem that I see allowances coming up, for investors is where there's contractor markup applied on top of the over allowance cost. This one is really deadly if you don't catch it. What you think happens that, if I go over $3,000 over the allowance amount, I just pay $3,000. Wrong. What actually happens is that most contracts say something like, all additional costs are subject to contractor overhead and profit of 15 to 25%, right? And then the real example is that, for example, flooring allowance is $12,000, but the actual flooring you end up selecting, let's just say, is $15,000. You came in at over allowance of $3,000. The contractor markup comes up, for example, if it's 20% of overhead and profit applied on that over allowance of $3,000, you end up having to pay $600. So your real overage is not $3,000, it's $3,600, plus tax differences sometimes. And if labor is, wasn't included in that amount, you also have to apply the markup, also have to be at that 20%, have to be applied on top of that over allowance for labor. So, and this have a compounding effect. Let's say across a flip, you exceed allowances by, for example, cabinets, you come over at $4,000 over the allowance amount for that line item. Flooring, you come in at $3,000 plus. Tiling, you over by $2,500. Fixtures, you're over by $1,500. Your total overages is $11,000. then you add the 20% markup on top of that, that extra cost comes up to $13,200. That's an entire month of carrying costs in the Bay Area. So you end up being exposed in that contractors earn more when you upgrade. However, there's a misaligned incentive here, because what happens is that, contractors, end up earning more from you, even though they're providing the same labor on the material. It just happens to be a more expensive finished material. So they get another extra 20% just because you chose a more expensive finish, right? And so what might end up is that there's a misalignment of incentive for the contractor who might be motivated to and might encourage you or don't mind that you choose the more expensive finishes because they would earn more from that, right? So what happened is that the overages in the allowance quietly eat your profit margin away without even increasing your ARV proportionally, right? So how do you protect yourself? I think it's very important that when we, create that contract with the GC, that we clearly say it in writing, contract language that's allowed to have that effect of saying, there's the best way to say is to no contractor markup on allowance overages. But if the general contractor don't go for that, then you might tone it down a little bit to saying, yes, you're allowed to have a markup, but it's capped at, say, 10% instead of like 15, 25%. And it applies to labor only and not for materials. So what you don't want to have in your contract language is like sentences like markup applies to all additional costs, including a material. Okay, so I think so what is it like? Why does this hit fix and flip investors harder than homeowners when it comes to allowances? Because homeowners on one end, they make decisions that are based on emotions, because they're going to live in the house and use the home for a very long time, right? And so they have like a longer timeline, so they have more budget flexibility. Whereas us fix and flipper, this is not good. Allowances is a very like serious area of risk for us flipper, because your allowance, when you blow your budget or go over, the allowance amount, the thing is, there's like the comps, the resale, the ARV value doesn't mean that it increases proportionately with your increase in your allowance amount, right? Increasing your actual cost. And so while you have like costs that are increasing by, say, 15%, your ARV doesn't proportionally increase by 15% for you to maintain your profit margin, right? So another reason why this hits us, number two, is that the lenders have a fixed draw schedule. So whatever it is that they had approved you originally on that rehab budget, just because you under allowed, for that line item, and you find that you need to find extra money, many lenders will not lend you that extra money, and then you need then to turn around and find the extra money to be able to fund those allowances, to come out of pocket, or to find other investors, or let's say other lenders, private money lenders, to be able to fund that overage, right? It's because we don't have the luxury, because our margin, we're very margin sensitive. You don't have the luxury to not pay attention to this, to your allowance budget. And plus, you are time sensitive. You have to act fast and move fast. And so you need to be able to to put in place these strategies that I have talked about before in order to help you to not only fine-tune your budget and to be able to plan more strategically to be able to cover the costs. Like I mentioned, it's better to have built in that cushion and that buffer in there to protect, at least to protect your margin and not be able to have the funding to be able to fund any overages that you have. So a $15,000 allowance mistake doesn't just cost $15,000. It actually reduces your ROI and extends your timeline, and it increases the cost of your interest if you had to borrow money to fund that additional cost. But it also increases your stress and causes you decision fatigue. So there's also a silent double charge trap that is very common. For example, like your appliance allowance was like $10,000, and you buy the allowance yourself. The investor I go out there and buy the fridge and the stove and oven myself. But then the contractor still charges me for appliance coordination, delivery handling, and installation supervision. Now, what just essentially happened, I just paid for not only the retail price paid the retail price for the appliance, plus I have to pay for the soft labor fees, plus the markup, even though I was the one who went out there and looked for the products and bought it myself. But the GC will still charge their markup on top of that $10,000 appliance that I bought. So, if you buy, you yourself, the investor, went out and bought the materials yourself, your contract should say words that says the contractor shall not apply markup or coordination fees on owner supplied materials, right? That's the best case scenario, to build that in to be able to help control that cost. And also, the investor grade contract rule that I like to follow is that before signing with a GC, I tell other investors is to highlight every allowance and answer the questions like, is the materials included? They must be clear. Is the labor included? Right? Is the tax and delivery included? Is there markup on the overage? Right? There shouldn't be markup on the overage, but if there is, you should put language in there that should cap that markup percent that they're allowed to charge on that overage. And if there's a credit, if I come in under, how will that be handled, right? And then also clearly stipulate who is going to buy the material. Is it you, the investor, or is it the general contractor? Not both. I recommend not doing both, because otherwise it will be just too messy, and then it will be hard for you to keep track and control who bought what, right? And so if the contractor can't answer cleanly on the things that I just mentioned, then your budget isn't real yet. So to straight up, the bottom line is allowances are risk transfer tools. If they are vague, the risk is on you. But if they're clearly defined, the risk stays controlled. The thing is that you can't eliminate allowance risk. But what you can do is that you can price it, you can cap it, and then you can control it, right? And so if you like this video and you find it very helpful, please click like and subscribe down below. And I hope to see you again next time, where I can share more useful information. Have a great day.